And welcome back to the Hot Lap. And Johnny Herbert, was he sacked? Or can you truly be sacked from what is a voluntary role? So the big news coming out today is Johnny Herbert is gone. He's no longer an FIA steward. Rejoice, Verstappen fans, I guess. But I think there's maybe more to it. And it's, for me, kind of a bit sad. So here's the FIA statement. It is with great regret. We announced today, is it really with great regret, they're FIA? Johnny Herbert will no longer fulfill the position of an F1 driver steward for the FIA. Johnny is widely respected, but not enough for you to keep him, clearly, and brought invaluable experience and expertise to his role. However, after discussion, it was mutually agreed that his duties as an FIA steward and that of a media pundit were incompatible. So the job he gets paid for compared to the job he volunteers for was incompatible, as in the volunteer job being the FIA steward. But they've said, we thank him for his service and wish him well in his future endeavours. So let's have a look at the motorsport.com article. Dropping Herbert as F1 stewards leave fundamental problem unsolved. So we've got punishing an unpaid volunteer, they said, but taking a paid job is at least an hour late and a few dollars short. But before we get into it, let's get into the actual official story. Johnny Herbert removed as FIA steward as his punditry work is declared incompatible. So the FIA have announced that Johnny Herbert is no longer going to serve as a steward, and Herbert had served on the rotating FIA steward panel and continued to offer views on Formula One through work as a pundit. But the governing body said he will no longer serve on the stewarding panel. The three-time Grand Prix winner began serving as an FIA steward once he basically finished. He departed his role from Sky Sports F1. I miss him. I really liked him on there. So the views of any pundit relying on voicing opinions on the sport and the role of being a steward centred on neutrality in decision making. The FIA has opted to remove Herbert from its rotating panel, and they've obviously gave out that statement thanking him, etc. And he told safe betting sites, as I've always said, I'm Johnny Herbert, the steward, and the professional. This is before, obviously, he got removed. And the professional during a race weekend. And Johnny Herbert, a pundit at other times who expresses what he thinks. Completely agree. He didn't express what he thought at a race weekend. Fair enough. When I am a steward, I do not express any opinions, as you shouldn't. Everyone has opinion. Martin Brundle has opinion, but to be fair, some may argue Martin Brundle is not a steward. Why can't I, when I'm not at the racetrack? Completely agree with that one too. The racetrack has been my world for 50 years. If I don't agree with what I see on the racetrack, I will say so. It's not just Max. He said, I'll criticise anyone I feel if warranted. I understand it's from Yoss's point of view because it's his son. Is there any bias? No, of course not. And I don't think there is. Yes, I mean, I know people love to go, it's British bias that, British bias this. I don't think in there's any. I don't think there's any British bias. I think the only bias is from the people that don't like that particular decision, and we're going all the way back to the Mexican Grand Prix. I mean, to be fair, as you can see here from the article, Max Verstappen takes aim at Johnny Herbert. What does he say? Extreme accusations made. Well, I think it was down to Max Verstappen's extreme driving at the Mexican Grand Prix. As you know, he was given two separate penalties during that Mexican Grand Prix. With the three-time Grand Prix winner Herbert sitting on the stewards panel, it was all his fault, apparently. Now, speaking during the weekend in Mexico, following the race week in Mexico, Herbert spoke about his evaluation of Verstappen's driving, and this is maybe why it ended up being incompatible. And now, having been involved in the decision-making process that saw the reigning world champion hit with a 10-second time penalty. Now, even if Johnny Herbert says that there should be a 10-second time penalty, there are other stewards there that can be like, no, he can be outvoted. So was Verstappen's driving style on the edge or over the top? Yes, it was, said Herbert, and I think I'm inclined to agree, as I think a lot of F1 fans that were going to be honest. I mean, you paint the cars all the same colour, you forget it's a Max Verstappen and or Lando Norris. What he did in Mexico was wrong. Absolutely. Both those things. The last one where he just basically dive-bombed Lando Norris, as in you get out of the way or he crash. Dangerous driving as far as I'm concerned. But Verstappen driving style, Herbert said, was harsh, especially when he's taken a fellow driver off the track. Agreed. It's an absolute no-no for me. Current drivers, former drivers and stewards. He said, I'm such a big fan of Verstappen. It frustrates me massively when he drives the way he did in Mexico. Yes. But motorsport, let's go back then to that motorsport.com article that I thought was quite interesting. Johnny Herbert, as an F1 steward, leaves fundamental problem unsolved. And they've got kind of the saying, punishing an unpaid volunteer for taking a paid job is at least an hour late and $1 short. So won't somebody think of the poor volunteer? I don't think Herbert's poor, but yeah. Nobody has chaffed so publicly about the absurdity and inequity of relying on unpaid officials to do FIA's heavy lifting than its president, Mohammed bin Salem. Indeed, last year he announced the formation of a new officials department to instill professionalism in the next generation of sports officials. But he said, where's the money coming from? He wanted Formula One to pay. You guys are the governing body. You guys do the rules. I know this is a completely separate thing, but this guy, he needs to go. Come on. You surely got to agree Ben Salem needs to go. But anyway, in this sentiment, he was backed up by the FIA single-seater director, Nicholas Tobias, who recently told Motorsport.com it's probably getting a bit unfair to just rely on people to do it out of their good heart. And that's what we have now. We can't go to a more professional body in the future. That's not to exclude volunteers, but it's to have a body that can spend the Monday morning after a race analysing every single decision, making sure it was reached correctly, seeing what could be improved, etc. Laudable though it is, he said, it's in racing's here and now, the article is saying, is that stewarding is unpaid expenses only proposition. And those expenses probably don't stretch as far as wine from near the bottom of the list. Now, for those stewards placing their heads in the proverbial lion's mouth of Formula One, this entails striking off a week of their lives in service of a pursuit in which it's impossible to get every decision right. Yeah. Not only that, one has to contend with the inevitable high-profile consequences being targeted for abuse by people who should know better, leading on people who don't. By this, I refer to those team principals who disgenuously huff and puff through their dog whistles to trigger toxic fandoms. Completely agree there. On both sides, I've been guilty of being silly. Of Mercedes, Mercedes and Red Bull, for example. Maybe one of them. One official who has declared themselves done with the whole shebang told a Motorsport.com colleague that there was only one equivalent unpaid job that is harder, referring a school football match with all the ghastly parents. Yeah, completely agree. But with all this in mind, it says it seems a trifle peculiar, on the one hand, to play the smallest violin in the world for the unpaid volunteers, and on the other, drop one from the roster for having the temerity to have a paid side hustle. Motorsport.com understands the incompatible media role prompted from the FIA to basically get rid of Johnny Herbert from its pool of Grand Prix stewards was his paid partnership with sports site BetSafe, where a lot of his quotes have come from. This is, it must be said, a grubby trade, in common with much of the online betting industry, including the likes of Paddy Power and William Hill. BetSafe is a registered multi for the avoidance of paying a proper amount of corporation tax. Naughty. Such outfits routinely approach journalists and well-known media figures for content or comment, which to garnish their online offering or share via social media for greater search, especially if it's a spicy hot take. Johnny Herbert, Max Verstappen. And it's understood the FIA took a dim view of Herbert commenting on stewarding decisions. Yeah, I mean, it's fair. Now, certainly, some might interpret this as a bit, at best, tone deaf, at worst, a conflict of interest, especially given Herbert's presence at the steward at the Mexican Grand Prix, where Verstappen was penalised twice. And they've said that such decisions are guaranteed to cause shots to be fired, even if the people responsible for making the calls express their reasoning solely through the medium of the FIA's official documentation. So Herbert has been dropped because having a profile is fundamentally incompatible. If so, we have a problem, since ex-drivers have a profile. And if you dig back through the heaving drawers of this issue's history, ex-drivers were sought out and recruited as stewards because contemporary drivers demanded it. Only they went the reasoning, properly understood the intricate dynamics of racing. Yeah, I'll give you that. I think that's Antonio Liuzzi. There he is, the FIA, and Carlos Sainz on the grid. So, or is this the real issue? Expressing their personal opinion on a betting site isn't good for the FIA. To be fair, the FIA have been more and more like a dictatorship rather than anything else, with all these new rules coming out, the swearing rules, which is, I know we haven't done a video on it, but yeah, it's getting ridiculous. With the Herbert thing, for me that's a grey area. I can maybe understand, but the article then carries on saying, I respectfully suggest this matter should have been taken up earlier. Yeah, it should have done. Let's say around the end of last October, and nipped in the proverbial bud, rather than becoming a focal point of a slow news week at the back end of January. Which, yeah, completely agree. And now at any point during the intervening period, it would be simple to communicate sensible guidelines over what paid work is considered incompatible with voluntary stewarding. That would have made more sense. So, F1 Stewarding, it says, presently lies in limbo while the FIA is taking steps towards professionalising the officials, and the Grand Prix Drivers Association want the stewarding panel to consist of paid professionals. These two bodies are at loggerheads over who has to dip into their pockets for this luxury. I think it should be the FIA, personally. Meanwhile, a fundamental truth grows seemingly unacknowledged. Stewarding is now the subject of so much toxic sentiment that most sensible people wouldn't do it even if you paid them. Perhaps we should ask for volunteers. Oh, yeah, completely agree. I mean, that article, I think, hits the nail on the head with the problem with F1 stewarding. So, Johnny Herbert, was he sacked? I don't think. No. Can he be sacked from a voluntary job? Yeah, I guess you can. I don't think Johnny Herbert really cares, to be honest. I mean, he wasn't getting any money from it, and he can still give his opinions about Max Verstappen, which I think a lot of people, and I particularly the ones he gave in Mexico after the Grand Prix, completely agree with. But once again, Max Verstappen, and I agree with him. It's a shame we've got to talk about Max like that because he's such an amazing driver, a generational driver, one of the best drivers potentially ever. Anyway, I digress. If you made it to the end, that's absolutely amazing. Just by clicking on the video and listening to me or watching us or watching me is more than enough. If you want to do a bit more and you're not, please hit that subscribe button. I like numbers. Numbers going up, I like even more. That would be brilliant. But hit that notification button, more importantly, if you do not want to miss a video. And if you want to do that a bit more, hit that like button. It does make a difference. And comment below, let us know what you think. Thank you very much. Stay safe. Wow, that was a bit loud. Honey. Stay safe. Stay safe. And speak to you soon.